Well, so we are, you listen, so you probably have like gathered this anyway, but we are recording now. But we just kind of like start talking, and honestly, whenever we feel like it's a good place to like start the episode, like in post, we just like go in there because what we found in the past was it was like, we don't want to like we want to tell people that they're being recorded, right? Just for kind of like a decency thing. But if we were like, okay, now we're going to start the show, and then it was like the whole conversation shifted, right? And so we've tried to get away from that a little bit, but yeah. So we're just going to keep talking like normal, and whenever in post Ben decides that it's a good time to cut in, that's when we'll cut in.
Perfect.
Yeah, we would have liked to catch all that talk about hot chocolate, but oh well.
I saw the 5 go on and I started getting quiet.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, if they had like a sneaky setting on here, I'd use it.
Yeah, and like you said, I've listened to podcasts.
People, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I was naturally born a quiet person. I didn't actually start talking until I was about 25. So it comes pretty easy for me to keep my mouth shut.
Well, I mean, Joe, in our real life, we're probably pretty quiet. We're quieter guys. I might talk more. I'm starting to talk less. This thing kind of talks you out. So it's like therapy.
Yeah.
Was it hard for you guys to start hearing yourself?
Yeah, I definitely.
Yeah, a little weird at first.
I hated it. I hate the sound of my own voice.
Yeah, it's a little weird at first, but it gives you that opportunity to work on your speaking voice, I guess.
Yeah.
Opportunity you wouldn't otherwise have.
I tell you what it'll do. You know all those filler words people talk about? Man, it'll expose you on that quicker than anything. Especially, things are just like a stream of consciousness coming out of your mouth and you don't even notice. And then all of a sudden you listen to it back and you're all ums and uhs and likes and and da 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 da. And like only half of the sentence is real content.
Yeah. Well, I think it was in one of your podcasts you were talking about a BQA training that you're doing. And part of what made me start talking is I wanted to become more of a professional. The Beef Commission was actually doing a media training. And one of my buddies signed me up for it at a cattleman's function, and I didn't want to do it. And you're in a room with 3 people, and they're asking you questions after you went through a class. And I can remember just being tight-lipped and not wanting to talk, and kind of like the anchor man. I don't know what my hands are doing. And that was really what got me. When I say I didn't talk till I was 25, I got done with that. And then they had me do a couple interviews. And, it would scare me to death. I mean, just awful. Hated seeing myself on camera. Hated listening to myself. But got me out of my shell to actually start talking.
Yeah, before doing this, Kyler, like when I would, change the answering machine on my cell phone, I hated that because you had to say, hey, it's Ben, leave a message. And then you had to listen to it. And you're like, God, I sound so terrible. I better redo that. And then you redo it like 10 times and you still think you sound terrible. And so after you've done 60 podcasts, kind of can't outrun your own terrible voice. But also, like you're saying about becoming educated, I think through doing this, I'll have someone come ride a horse or send me a horse to ride. And then they come, for a day and ride it with you for a couple hours. And you're trying to tell them something, like pass on a little information, and they're not getting it at all. And you think it's their problem. But then you edit the podcast you do, and you listen to yourself talk, and you're like, well, this idiot can't string a sentence together anyway. So no wonder that, that person wasn't getting the instruction I was giving. So it's a me problem. My communication's totally backwards. So I've been finding it helpful in that area as well.
Yeah, so you said you were a quiet kid. Did you grow up, like what kind of household did you grow up in? Did you have a lot of brothers and sisters, or is anyone in the family loquacious, or are y'all kind of quiet?
No, they're all, I have three older sisters, and they're all, one of them is really loud. The other ones are definitely more outgoing than me, but I was the quiet kid for sure.
Growing up with three older sisters, I feel like that's a good way to grow up humble.
Yeah, you fight dirty, I can tell you that much.
Yeah, Joe, you missed out. You don't even have any sisters.
Yeah. No, I'm an only child, and my fiance says that people can tell. She says I have only child syndrome, but yeah. So I know now you said you're kind of located kind of in the greater Seattle area, like an hour or so from the city, something like that. Have you always been from that area?
So my grandparents lived, Ellensburg is where I'm from, which wouldn't necessarily be considered Seattle. So we're on the east side of the Cascade Mountains, and that you'd almost consider that the dividing line for the state. So this side would be red, the other side would be blue. And it's not that, it's intermingled now. I mean, Washington State has a little bit of everything, which is kind of neat. So from where we're at, it's about an hour and a half drive to get to Seattle, and almost right smack dab in the middle of the state, and then about 3 hours from the Idaho line on the other side. So we're just on the east side of the Cascade Mountains.
I see. Okay, cool. And you said you grew up there.
My grandparents lived in Ellensburg, Washington. And then my immediate family didn't have anything to do with agriculture or animals or anything. So I grew up on the west side of the mountains, which if you're from the east side of the mountains and you're from the west side, then you're just terrible. You'd be a coastie if you were from here. And so that's where I grew up until I was in high school, and then I came back to Ellensburg. So I wouldn't consider myself grown up yet, but that's where I spent my childhood.
I see. Well, we haven't talked a ton, but when we did talk, I could tell. I was like, man, this is like a real deal cattleman. I mean, he's into this stuff, and we'll get more into kind of what you've got going on now. But for someone who has kind of the obvious passion that you do, and not having any immediate family in agriculture, can you talk about how you kind of got that? Because again, I don't know you that well, but from the little bit we've talked on the phone, it seems like a really defining quality for you.
Yeah, and I'm not exactly certain how, because my dad was a chef by trade. My mom was an interior designer, but my grandpa had a rodeo company, and I don't ever remember being a little kid that grew up and thought, oh, I want to go spend time with grandpa. I mean, I just remember wearing a cowboy hat from my first memory, spending every summer with my grandpa that had the rodeo company here in Ellensburg. And so that was really my childhood was around horses and livestock. And he always had border collie dogs around, and I always loved the dogs, but they didn't do anything but get in the way. I mean, you're constantly screaming, and why nobody locked them up, I have no idea. But looking back at it now, I would have loved to have had the build and the size. And I mean, the dogs were big, black, white, long haired. I mean, huge feet. Wanted to bite for sure, but no one knew how to use one. But I mean, my first memories are always with horses and dogs and hanging out with them, not talking much. And so I spent my childhood summers with my grandparents and the rodeo company into my early 20s, and my grandpa was getting ready to sell his company. You could kind of see the writing on the wall. And Joel Connor, that you guys had on your podcast before, ended up just being on the rodeo team here in Ellensburg, and we got to be friends that way. And I was picking up for my grandpa at the time, and not very good as a horseman, but everybody sees you out in front of big crowds and you're picking up, so everyone starts asking you to ride horses. So when I left my grandpa, initially that's what I did, was started riding outside horses. and Joel was leaving and working for a guy named Ernie Patty. And I don't know if Joel talked about him at all, but he was really big into the horsemanship. And there's actually 3 guys that had a fair amount of money, and they would follow Buck around when he would be going up here. And they're known as the 3 amigos. It'd be Mitch Williams, Gary Rattan, and Ernie Patty. And so I ended up going to work for Ernie, and that kind of exposed me to Buck Brannaman, and I had an indoor arena that I could ride at, and loved the horsemanship and loved that part of it, and started getting into it. And from the rodeo background, it just felt good. I mean, it felt so much more safe, and it wasn't, there was a way to fix a problem instead of just grinning and bearing it and getting through it. But I really missed the livestock handling that I got with the rodeo company, because you would gather, you would sort, you'd be loading. So I ended up going to work for a local rancher that was here, and they were into low stress cattle handling. So I was still working for Ernie Patty up at his indoor arena. I was more or less a glorified landscaper for 3 or 4 hours, and got to use his indoor arena to ride colts. And then went to work for this local ranching company, and that led into leasing some pasture. So I went from being a horse trainer to a cowboy, and then started getting my own pasture leases. And one of the biggest things out here that's hard to come by is ground, because there's so many people and it's all getting bought up. And that was my real opportunity, was somebody would move over here and they'd bought 5 acres. So I leased 5 acres from someone. The next door neighbor had 5 acres. So I'd lease their 5 acres and just kind of go out to where I had a good chunk of irrigated ground and running other people's cattle. And then I got into buying my own cattle, and then I bought my own property, and then the leases kept getting bigger and bigger to now where, I mean, it got to the point where there's about 30,000 acres leased, an hour and a half from Seattle, where nobody can get ground. And it's all just from getting into an area and really caring about what you're doing. And so I've done a little bit of everything in the cattle aspect, from, a whole lot of stuff that doesn't make sense and doesn't make money. Pretty expensive lessons, to now where I'm working for someone else. And so I've taken all that stuff that I put together working for him. And that's really been neat to see it all come to start to finish, and just the way the operation is going to end up getting put together and run.
Wow.
That was the fast version.
So did you just say you are currently working for somebody else? And
I am.
Or
Yeah.
you worked for someone else, gained the experience in, okay. Wow.
Yeah.
So
So
are you long-term thinking of staying in that area with it getting built up and getting built over? Is that part of your plan going forward?
right now it is. I mean, I think in the cattle business, there's more opportunity in areas like this than there is in other areas that have been established, and there's 5-generation ranches, and, Forest Service permits and DNR permits. Everybody has all those things already. We're here. Someone goes and buys a 1,000-acre place, and it gets broke into 2 different chunks. They don't know what they're going to do with 500 acres. So there really is more opportunity with development coming for somebody that wants to run cows without buying the ground.
So that's the kind of the glass half full attitude, I guess. And I've never even thought of it that way. But those folks buying up all that land, they're not ranchers. And so you're taking advantage of that angle.
Yeah. I mean, it unintentionally, but that's kind of what's happened. Yeah. And the thing there was,
we have
I'm
a
trying
young
to
kid
think.
here, and he was just lamenting the other day. He was like freaking out that there's going to be no land when he grows up because all these people are buying it. And I didn't have any answer for him. Hopefully he'll listen to this, but I was just saying, hey man, you got to look on the bright side somewhere, because 50 years from now, some kid's going to wish they were alive when you're alive right now. So this is fascinating.
Well, and it's interesting. I'd be more worried about the government buying property than I would private ownership. I mean, it's just so much, and government ground is great. It's so much harder to get anything done, and there's, policies and regulations, and you're dealing with 20 people, and the private ground is a lot easier to deal with, private landowners.
Kyler, can you still see Joe there?
Yeah.
He wasn't talking, was he? He's off my
No,
radar.
no, I
Yeah,
wasn't
okay.
talking, but
All right, sorry, Joe. I can't see you, so I didn't know if maybe you dropped off, and you know how we've done that in the past.
no, we're
All
good,
right,
man.
we
I
can
was
edit
just,
this
I was,
part.
yeah, I was letting you get all your thoughts out.
Oh,
Um,
appreciate it.
yeah. So, so I guess were you a part of that rodeo company? I kind of want to get back to how you got into the horsemanship because I think one of the things that makes you very interesting to me, at least, is you're a very seems like a very knowledgeable cattleman. You've done a lot of stuff from that perspective, so you understand kind of the business, understand kind of the stockmanship, and understand kind of the horsemanship. Which there's not there's less of those people than there are people who are, for example, maybe people just that are really successful in the cattle industry and don't want anything to do with the horse. And there are people too who, they'll in horses, even in like the horsemanship discipline, and the cattle are more just like a tool to work on the horse, and they're not really invested in the cattle the same way someone like you who's making a living from it might be. So that's kind of where I want to go with this. But I guess how can you kind of dive into more about how you got into the horsemanship deal? I mean, you said it was through Joel. Did you just watch him do something with some horses and think, oh, maybe I need to kind of start adopting that stuff, or did he mention something to you, or how'd that all work?
Well, no. So my family, my grandpa was Frank Beard, and he was a good horseman in his own regard. Not necessarily a natural horseman, but one thing that he had a great feel for is when the feet were leaving the ground, and he couldn't explain it. He could do it, and
Okay.
he was really good with riding a green horse without much preparation. And my great grandpa would be my grandma's dad that my grandfather Frank married. He actually came over from Holland. His parents came over from Holland and were dairy farmers. And he just knew at a young age that he wanted to be a cowboy. So he ran away from home and cowboyed all over Nevada and ended up coming back and trading horses and got a rodeo company. And that's where my grandfather met my grandmother was riding bucking horses. So it goes back a few generations. And then out of all my dad loved horses, loved to be around them, could ride, but didn't make a living with it. And so my grandfather's favorite person really was my Uncle Pat, who was a great hand and ended up going and picking up at the NFR and was part of the rodeo company. And he's a really great horseman. So it wasn't necessarily, I got to watch my grandpa a little bit. He was almost done riding horses by the time I came along, but my first word was horse. I just wanted to be a cowboy. Don't know why or how. So I grew up riding, and I mean, it was more, I can remember getting handed a switch as a 2-year-old kid and, hit him in the butt, make him do what you want, and pretty soon your hat brim's bent up like this and you're running across the pasture and everybody's yelling at you to pull back and you're trying to break the saddle horn off. And so little, you can't do anything. So I kind of grew up like that and then got to start some colts when I was a teenager and had actually started picking up. And so it was with my grandpa helping me a little bit, but he wouldn't say much. He wouldn't do much. It was kind of more like he would give you enough to get you started and then turn you loose. And he really was more or less done riding. So, and I was always like I said, a quiet kid, and I always liked animals. I mean, as a little kid, there's pictures of me sleeping in the front yard with the dogs. And it was just, I've always been that way. And so then and this is going to play more into the horsemanship than the stockmanship, or the stockmanship more than the horsemanship. But when we'd be gathering stuff, you'd start to see things happen. And the best way I can relate it is petting a horse to the stop, where you're making it relief when they're going where you want. And so there'd be 1 or 2 people on a horse, and there's always a ton of people hanging around a rodeo company that do nothing. I mean, it's just like, I don't know if you guys watch Dale Brisby, and I don't remember what he calls the ranch that he has, but there's always 4 interns that are hanging around not doing a goddamn thing. Well, so imagine if you were the one that went and gathered a 60-acre pasture and you get to the corral and then 4 interns turn out and start hooping and hollering. And so all the pressure now is at the corral where you don't want them. So that kind of stuff could kind of see and start recognizing. But Joel just wanted to be a cowboy. And so he came to Ellensburg and he thought being a cowboy was a bull rider. And he had done a little bit of team roping and really just, I mean, it's as random as he filled an ad in the newspaper to get a job working. So he was a glorified landscaper for Ernie Patty. And he mentioned a little bit of this in his podcast, but he had no idea what he was doing. I mean, he was up there pulling weeds and mowing lawns, and this guy named Ray Hunt came to town. And Joel sneaks over to the porch and he's looking in the window and goes and meets Ray Hunt, has no idea who he is. And Joel and I were best friends at the time. So Joel would come back and tell me about what they were doing and what they were looking at, because I was riding horses all the time and liked it and enjoyed it. And so at this time, I'm picking up bucking horses. And Joel and I are still kind of talking, and he's in college. I'm probably a 19, 20-year-old kid. And I didn't really get into the horsemanship until I went to work for Ernie. So I went and watched a Buck Brannaman clinic and, would watch it just a little bit skeptical. And Joel would be telling me what he's doing. And I can remember I went and roped with Joel and Ernie, and, just like everybody does with a little bit of an ego, I'm watching what they're doing. I'm like, oh my God, they can barely dally when they do catch Jiminy Christmas. Why would I want to do this? So it wasn't that I was, I mean, I had fun, but you can imagine what it would be like, going fast and roping and then seeing ranch roping for the first time. And I should tell you, I couldn't rope to save my life. And it worried me when I was picking up bucking horses, because I didn't grow up roping. I rode, I was good with livestock, but I can remember being in the arena and, just thinking, please leave. I don't want to have to rope in front of anybody. And so talking about stuff starting to feel a little bit better. It wasn't until I left my grandpa and I went to work for Ernie and I was riding colts full time that I really got interested in getting a little bit more knowledge and getting a little bit better. And then that was also kind of when I met Ricky Quinn. So I had some pretty tough horses that I had been working on, and Ricky rolls in and, helped me out with it. And you could really start to see the difference and started looking at a little bit more and then getting more into the, and then you see somebody that's really good at ranch roping like Brannaman. That's slightly different than seeing a 22-year-old kid that just started riding and someone else doing it as a hobby. So then I kind of started seeing the difference. And it wasn't until I wasn't done with rodeo stuff, but was phasing my way out and riding horses for the public to where it really, really meant a lot more to me.
So with the riding horses for the public, how did you transition from that into the ranch life, and why did you decide to make that transition?
I really just missed the livestock part of it. I mean, with the rodeo company, every week you gather cattle, every week you sort cattle, every week you load cattle. And growing up, that was kind of what I became good at. And that's what you're doing on a weekly basis. And so I got to where the animals, the bucking horses and the bulls were being gathered every week. This is toward the end of my career. My grandpa would have 5 or 6 people hanging around all the time. Like I was telling you guys, it was about like Dale Brisby, except there was no alcohol allowed. I guess I haven't seen those guys drink. They just act like they are. But it went to where there was no one there, and you could see the change in the animals, and everything was getting easier and nicer to load and nicer to put on the truck. And even when you go to pick up colts for the first time, it was getting a little bit better just from consistent handling. So that part of it, I really, really missed. And I didn't get that when I was in the arena riding horses, and kind of missed doing outside stuff. And so I got a job to go help gather some cattle out of the trees up next to the Canadian border. And I don't know how much help I was, but was getting paid good money to go up there and do it, and started doing that and thought, man, I want to do more of this. So I came back and called a local rancher that I figured might be needing a hand, and went to work for them. And that was kind of how I transitioned into that. And then really kind of ended up getting away from the horses more than I wanted as the cattle operation started growing. Around here we have to irrigate. So a lot of the ground, the Cascade Mountains, like I was saying, are close, and there's a big reservoir, and all the irrigation water gets stored up there. runs downhill to the valley that we live in. So if you're going to run cows in this valley, you irrigate and you build hot wire. So that turned into kind of a whole nother thing, and horses got put on the back burner a little bit, which I didn't like. And now it's, you still get to use them, but they're not as nice, not as prepared, not as much time in arena as what I'd like to be spending on them. But it's kind of moving back around to that now.
Gotcha. I can't tell what you're doing, Ben. I can't tell if you have something to say or not.
No, I can't see either one of you guys. So I'm just making sure that my thing's all set up. Normally, you guys reload after a couple seconds, and today we've got a thunderstorm blowing through. So just trying to stay current.
All right, no worries.
I do have to tell you guys, if there's too long of an awkward pause, I think it's funny to hang up. So.
Huh? No, that's really funny. That keeps the listeners waiting for a minute.
Yeah, we'll keep them in suspense.
Because they're like, yes, we finally got these guys to stump themselves, and they don't realize we just have, screens out for a minute.
Yeah. So I guess the last part of this equation then, this is something I find in where I'm at now, where kind of starting to get more involved in like a family operation, and the majority of my income still comes from riding horses for the public, and but we are thinking long term in terms of how to transition things, look at my dad's retirement, things like that. How do you balance, there, depending on the situation, which, where you're irrigating, running hot wire and stuff, you could be like a purist, right? In terms, a purist in that, okay, I just want to be as profitable as possible in my cattle operation. And in some cases that might involve horses, in some cases it might not. And then you could also be a purist the other way, where you're like, well, I'm going to be a purist to this craft and the horsemanship and all this. And we might even manage our cattle a little differently such that I can practice this craft. But we might, lose everything in the process because we're not going to make any money. We're just going to kind of be like starving artists, right? And there's definitely folks at both ends of the spectrum with that. And how has that something you have felt like you've had to negotiate a little bit? And again, maybe your situation, since you are on that kind of land area, it sounds like you do need horses. But so maybe your situation lends to just like having a horse anyway. But can you talk to that a little bit? Like if that's something you run into at all?
Oh, absolutely it has. And this is where the horsemanship and being a cowboy has been so cool. So that one thing I didn't talk too much about was getting into the stockmanship part of everything. And so I always cared about it a little bit, but I would say I leaned more on the horse side. And not that I didn't want cows to be profitable, but I would have been more apt to run a cow down the fence and rope it if it didn't go in the corral, just because I thought it was fun and wanted to get my horse to track up on something. I went to a stockmanship clinic that Tom Nossinger put on, and it was more of a 3-hour seminar, but a lot of what he was saying started to make sense. And then going back to the rodeo animal days, I could see the comparisons through it. And he didn't explain much that crossed over with the horsemanship. The way that he was explaining everything, I wasn't thinking of those two things as being the same. But I've always had horses that can do something. It didn't take me long to get dogs that could do stuff with cattle. And then once I got into the stockmanship, it didn't take me long to get cattle that could handle. And so now when you're talking about a lot of these pasture leases and the opportunity I'm telling you about, a lot of it is single strand hot wire, and we're driving cows through a housing development And there's been plenty of failures. It hasn't all been perfect, but I will tell you, I've done stuff that very few other people would do, even be willing to do, not necessarily whether they could or couldn't do it. They wouldn't be willing to do it. And so that's led to more opportunities. And then being able to take cattle from all over the place and get them to handle and be able to do stuff has really been the biggest part of my opportunity. So when it comes to balancing stuff, the way my operation is set up now, I mean, it's all kind of a single strand hot wire chasing your tail. When we've got cattle turned out, you're checking fences, you're hauling water, you're moving cattle. I mean, it's a rat race, which I don't care for that part of it. And that's where a lot of the preparation and the horsemanship stuff that I was telling you about, we get on and we go. And horsemanship is a part of everything I do, but I'll say it's more applied horsemanship than it is anything else. And I very, very rarely lope a horse unless I'm tracking up on something to doctor it. And so then, I'll have horses that I might have gotten started and put 5 rides on it, and I'll use it for the summer, and it'll track up on a yearling, but you go to lope a circle and I would be embarrassed to go to town. I mean, and it's the horse is in between your legs and reins and it's doing stuff, and it'll lope a circle. Don't get me wrong, but not to the standard that you guys would want it to. So it's been a huge part of everything, and the balance of being a purist on the profitability. I mean, without the horsemanship and the horses and the dogs and the stockmanship, there's no way that I could make everything work. And the profitability doesn't have as much to do with production as what you'd think it would. I mean, it's more about having a good plan in place ahead of time. And the Ranching for Profit school is something I went to, and they talk about knocking off dead tree branches, not pruning limbs. And I would say when you get into most of the production stuff, with the exception of growing grass, that's got to be important. And if you can do, rotational grazing where you're resting your grass long enough, you can double your head counts. I mean, that is a real thing. That's not a farce by any means. But the little stuff, when you're talking about production, generally isn't going to make you profitable or not. But for me, like I'm saying, I mean, the horses and the dogs and the cattle handling, there's just no way I could even have the pastures that I have without that stuff.
So, like, you're a really good example of a guy that I think a lot of young guys would like to be like. Now, maybe they're not trying to do cattle. Could be horses. Probably one of the two. But you know the deal. And whether it's around Brannaman or probably back in the day with Ray Hunt, a lot of these young guys that are going to the clinics and riding and getting into horsemanship, and they don't come from money, or they don't come from a big ranching family necessarily. And so you're kind of a guy, you're on your own, you own a pickup truck maybe. And then you have this dream of being a cowboy and like having your place and having some horses, and it's like bunkhouse talk, right? And you're not really sure how that's going to look someday. And then you're looking at your current situation. You're not really even handy yet. You're trying to look at how you'd make money so that you could buy a ranch. And then the more you learn about buying land, you're like, okay, maybe I can't do that. It's just so many things, you're just like, oh shit, I didn't inherit the family ranch, or I'm not the son of a trust fund, recipient, kind of sucks. So you're a great example because you're a guy, you've got livestock and you're managing this land, and you're making this life look possible for a guy who's way down the ladder from you, going, yeah, someday I want to figure out how to get all these parts together and like make a go of it in the 21st century. So I guess my question for you is, like, where did you first get the gumption to start like being agriculturally entrepreneurial? Is that just a natural thing that you have, or did you meet somebody, or is it this ranching school you're talking about that you learned some of these techniques? Because even something like going and finding the neighbors that just moved in and recognizing their 5 acres would work for grazing cattle, then approaching them, talking to them about using it, finding the fencing, finding the water tank, getting the cattle. I mean, it's easy to say, yeah, the I'm using this 5 acres because these folks just bought it. But then all the moving parts that go into that, like you just said, you got the seven guys standing around, the 7 interns just hanging out back at the corrals when the one guy's driving the cattle in. Well, all those 7 guys hanging out by the corrals probably aren't the kind of guys who figure out how to use the neighbor's land, who just moved to town and run cattle on it. So what makes you different? How come you ended up doing this?
I have no idea, but I can tell you around here we've got a lot of rocks, round river rocks, and they're good size. They're probably like this big. And I feel like my entire life since I started doing this is almost like, and I laugh about this and joke, this is an actual saying. I feel like I take 2 of these rocks and put my genitals in between and just start smashing them. And that's a little bit what it feels like trying to get this to come out the other side. And in the beginning, so I got married at 28 and was outstanding. So we sat down, and Ernie Patty was a guy that was able to retire young. And that's who I was working for that had the barn. And I can remember asking him, and I'm literally pulling his weeds and riding horses in the afternoon and asking him, okay, I want to make money. I want all these things. How do I get it? And he asked me, have you written down your goals? Write down your goals. And so he gave me a couple books to read, one of which being Rich Dad, Poor Dad. I read it, haven't followed very much of it. I should have. And then got married. So my wife and I wrote our goals down and started getting after it. And eventually those goals changed for each of us, or we thought they were different. But that is one thing that I'll say. I would just go from one thing to the other. And eventually I quit looking at my goals and quit looking at my plan, which kind of led to me now, not owning the property, but I was really trying to just work my way out of it and just put my head down and put everything I had into it. And I've done all kinds of different things, from buying little high risk calves to feeding cattle and finishing and trying to direct market, run other people's cattle, different classes of cattle, doing custom feeding cattle for people. And it's really easy to get lost. So as far as, have I always been the person that's wanting more? For some reason I am. I wish I wasn't that person, but I will say, sticking to a plan in the beginning and really focusing on your goals would have kept me from doing a lot of the other things that I've done that weren't successful. But it's been, I wouldn't trade any of it. And it's gotten me to a point where there's certain things that I do now that I truly feel like I could be. Well, I'm the best person that I know at it. I know there's other people better than me. I just haven't been around them yet. And it's very small, certain little parts of what I'm doing. And this isn't what I had written down 10 years ago when Ernie Patty was asking me about my goals. That's not where I'm at now. And they've all changed, but it's such a fun spot to be in and be able to set things. And, the place that the guy that I sold everything to now, he wanted a ranch and wanted to invest some money in it. And, now we've got a really good working relationship together, and he's letting me set the priorities. And I'm really excited to see where all this stuff is going to go. So I may not own it all, but it's going to be so much better than if I did. And if I had just kept, smashing my testicles between 2 round rocks. So now I've set the rocks down. My goals might be a little different, but now we can go back to those priorities that Joe was asking me about. And we can put horsemanship at the top, and all of it is the same: horsemanship, stockmanship, and then the production follows. And so that the guy that I'm working for has a big dirt work company, and in his dirt work company, he's union. So the biggest thing for him is safety. You can't have accidents that cost everybody a lot of money, a lot of downtime. So his philosophy is safety first, quality second, and then the production will come third. And so if we're equating that to a horse, think about your groundwork before you get on a colt. It's almost that exact order, where the first thing you're going to do is try to keep from dying. Then you're going to worry about quality. And if production is putting the first ride on it, if that's the first day, great. If that's the third day, but you're safe, you did it with quality, and then the first ride is production. So that's that's the way that we're running all of this stuff, which is hard to do when you have cattle, strewn out over a 40-mile area and you're trying to train employees. And So now we're just now getting back to the part where we can really hone in on the quality. And I got off subject. I'm sure I didn't answer your question, but
Well, you're working on it. So in that regard, would you have advice to your younger self in the testicle mutilation days? Or because, some people say, no, I wouldn't say a thing to my younger self. I'd say I'd just leave him alone because obviously I got to the right place. Or would you have something to say to your younger self who's like got all these hopes and dreams, but maybe not going about it right?
yeah, I mean, really, I would have just slowed down and stuck to a plan, because you get to a point where anybody worth a grain of salt is going to try to put your head down and work. And so, you're getting to a spot where it's spinning out of control and you just think, I got this, I can get it done. And that's probably the only thing I would have done, was slow down, gotten a better plan in place, maybe not try to take on quite as much. But I can tell you, I damn sure would have had 2 round rocks in my hand just for a little while.
Huh. Well, that is interesting, because that does bring it full circle to horsemanship, right? Like if you were in the round corral you could be doing some groundwork and shit's going sideways, and one horseman could be like, well, I'm just going to spend another 3 hours and I know what I'm doing. We're going to get this. We're not leaving till it's done. And another horseman would just have the plan and be like, well, it's just not happening today. Going to put him up. And the other guy might take him 3 years to get that horse somewhere. And the guy who just put him away, even though he didn't get it all done that day, is going to advance that horse maybe in 30 days. It'd be where the other guy would be in 3 years. Just because he knows that even though outward appearances may not look stellar, the plan's going to come through in the end.
Yeah, for sure.
Wow. So like I'm sure you know much more about the cattle market than I do. We run some cattle here, but it's just cow calf outfit. We raise them, feed them a little bit and sell them. And I personally really enjoy the horses. Not to diss cows, and I know I love roping, so you need cows to rope. But I'm not like deeply invested in perfecting a cattle outfit. But it is interesting, and I know, like I said, I'm around a lot of other young people who are looking at everything going on, and they're like, "Oh my, what's my future going to be like?" And like I was hinting at earlier, I don't really know what to tell them. I'm the same age. I just try to have a good attitude. So that's why I had these questions for you, and one of them is, like, you obviously are a pretty optimistic guy. So when you see these like beef prices going up, do you have an optimistic take on that, on what you're going to do with that and profit off of it yourself?
Yeah. So seeing it coming, the U.S. cow herd is as low as it's been in 51 years. And so the other thing, this is part of what, and I'm not a cattle market expert. I'll be the first person to tell you that. I mean, I've made huge mistakes in the cattle market, but I mean, the biggest thing that no cattlemen do is buy stuff that appreciates in value. And so that's what becomes hard in a cattle market that's going up, is how do you buy something that's going to appreciate? You're buying in a high market, it's going to depreciate. And so our plan on the ranch that we're running now was to buy stuff that's going to, I mean, this seems like an easy business, right? You buy something that's going to appreciate in value rather than depreciate. And so a young cow, something before 6 years old, and none of this is mine. This is Wally Olson was a Bud Williams marketing guy. So none of this stuff is anything that I was smart enough to figure out, just smart enough to listen. So we're trying to find, the cattle market's already going up last year. And, we've got this new ranch owner, and we've got to get a plan put together, and we don't need a handful of cattle. Like, we need 800, 1,000 head. I mean, so now the cattle market's high. We got to figure out how we're going to stock all this grass. And so we went to the Wally Olson school, and we kind of go through everything. And we've got different types of feed. So some of it's up on a mountain, some of it's dry, some of it's good irrigated grass. So from April 1st, it was a little bit before that. I want to say the end of February, the 1st of March, we started buying cattle. And what we were looking for were young open cows, so a 2 to 4 year old cow. And then we went and bought some replacement quality heifers. And so the way that we were going to appreciate them and value was to get them bred. And so by May 1st, we were at 800 head. And so in that short span, we got all these cattle in, and we were rebuilding the processing barn and doing everything out of a little set of rolling corrals that I had and single strand hot wires. So we're getting cattle in from all over the Northwest. I mean, as far as North Dakota and as far south as California, and got them in. But basically our way to appreciate them, you buy a butcher cow, being a young cow, you get it bred. Now it's a bred cow. And then we AI'd all these heifers that we were talking about. And so right now, everything's coming home. We're preg checking. They pregged up good. We've started marketing cattle. So, taking advantage of the market this year was kind of easy because it went straight up. And now everybody's looking for bred females, and we've got 700 of them for sale. And then in the process of that, you get cows that are bred. And one of the most undervalued things all the time is a cow that's bred to calve outside the window everyone wants. So a fall cow, summer calving cows and fall cows are almost butcher price. So whatever the market is, that's always kind of undervalued. You can move it up, or we're going to run a fall calving herd. So we had the beginning of this summer, I think we had about 102 summer and fall calvers, and now we're up to about 160. And those were all just cows that we bought that were perceived open that they took to town. So that herd will continue to run. But the hard part is going to be, how do you ride the market back down? So we sold all these females when the market was going up. That's going to be good. What do you reinvest in? That's the question. And so Wally Olson has a program that's a cattle square. So you just start doing your herd inventory, so you know what your inventory is all the time. And then you go back and look at the market. And so we haven't gotten into that part of it yet. We're still at phase one, trying to sell females when nobody wants them yet. So we probably got a couple months to see how all this is going to play out.
So you're essentially you guys are like stockbrokers, but with cattle and wearing a cowboy hat, but you're having to just watch the market and ride it out, and got to make money on the way up, on the way down. And,
yeah.
So are you, Wally Olson, is that connected with Olson Farms there in, Nebraska, where Ricky's at?
No, they're different. Different outfit. Wally Olson was,
okay.
Yeah. Wally Olson was a Bud Williams guy, and Bud Williams was one of the most famous stockmanship guy that was going, that everybody learned from. He was kind of like the Tom Dorrance of stockmanship.
Yeah. Bud Williams. Yeah, that name, I've definitely heard of him. Huh.
Yeah.
So here's a question I have for you. Just hearing you talk about the operation, what's it like running fall calves in Washington? Because, like, for example, I know Ben, like, at their ranch, and pretty much everywhere in central Georgia, it seems like it's a fall calving place, right? And Virginia, I feel like I'm, at least on the East Coast, we're like right on the line. Like pretty much everywhere north of us always calves in the spring. North Carolina might be a crapshoot, but then South Carolina, Georgia on down, everyone calves in the fall. So I understand how there's a difference in the price, because they're under, maybe they don't have the same value, but I mean, part of the reason they are undervalued is because you don't have the same kind of expectancy out of those calves in the climate you're in. And again, I've never actually even been to Washington State, so maybe there's something I'm missing. But if you're going to play that game, you still have to manage that herd. So how do you go about doing that?
I think regardless of what you're buying, when it's all put together cattle, your conception rates and your death loss, you need to factor some in. It's not going to be like a closed herd that you originally have. But I mean, when I'm saying fall calving, we're talking about September, October. And so we've got 45 degrees in the morning, and it's still warming up to 80 degrees in the afternoon. So, I mean, I guess by noon, your beer's getting warm. That could be a downside. But
okay.
Getting the biggest problem is the input when you're trying to get them bred back. So that's when a cow's nutritional requirement is the highest. And now, the feed value is going down, and you're having to put a lot of inputs into them. but they've also ran dry all summer, so they're hog fat. So it actually doesn't work out as poorly as what it seems like it would. But now if you're talking about calving out in November, December, January, yeah, that would be absolutely miserable.
This episode of On the Move is brought to you by Lance and Sunshine Freilich Quarter Horses. Guys, Ben and I both ride horses for the public, and we can attest to what a difference it makes to have good genetics and a good mind to develop a horse. Lance and Sunshine Freilich Quarter Horses is having a production sale at their ranch, which is located about 60 miles south of Bismarck, North Dakota, near the South Dakota border. Their ranch is in the heart of beautiful ranch country, and these guys are AQHA heritage breeders, and the family's been raising quarter horses for about 75 years now. They make horses that are meant to be on a ranch. All their horses have substance, good bone, good feet, athleticism, and a sound trainable mind. They run about 70 brood mares that live out like horses. They have big pastures and they foal outside. So these foals, from day one when they hit the ground, they're dealing with the elements and learning how to survive. When I first got into horsemanship, I thought of the Freilich horses as big, stout, good using type horses for ranching. But now they brought in some more athletic bloodlines, I'd say. And man, the last horse I bought from them, I was very impressed. It wasn't just kind of your big standard ranch horse, although they still have those bloodlines aplenty. Let's talk about some of the studs they're using. They've got 5 stallions right now with bloodlines from studs like Gallo de Ciejo, Colonel Freckles, Missing Cash, Highbrow Cat, SDP Blue Blood, Two-Eyed Jack, McKeague, and Joe Quincy. They also use some AI sires, and that includes studs like Woody B. Tough, KC Pick, Barry Black Magic, Metallic MVP, and SDP Blue Blood. Like Lance and Sonny said on our show, they've learned from past podcast guests like Buck Brannaman and Joe Walter. And that's important because when you buy a horse from them, you're not going to be buying a horse with baggage. And that goes a long way. So if you're looking for a horse that you can use on the ranch or in the arena, their production sale is Saturday, September 23rd. The preview is going to start at 10 a.m. Central Time, and the sale is going to commence at 2 p.m. Central Time. If you want to look at the sale catalog, it's available online at jfranchhorses.com. For those that can't attend in person there in North Dakota, there is a DV auction online that will be available. At this sale, they're going to be offering 30 weanlings that are lightly halter broke, 20 yearlings that lead, tie, and load, and 12 great riding horses that range from ages 2 to 12 years old. Again, I can't recommend Lance and Sunshine enough, guys. So if you're in the market for a horse, go to jfranchhorses.com or find Lance and Sunshine Freilich Quarter Horses on Facebook. Now back to the show. Okay. That makes sense to me. Because, like I said, I know there's people that do it, but it also sometimes doesn't look very fun. So, but that makes sense. And like I said, I'm not super familiar with that climate, but that's still pretty good temperatures, especially for that latitude, seems like.
Yeah, sometimes by October we'll be dropping down. Halloween, it'll be freezing. Sometimes can get snow, but generally it comes in November, December.
Gotcha.
So a little while ago, you talked about going to a ranching school. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Could you just talk about that a little bit? What kind of accreditation did you get from that program?
So it's a 1-week school called Ranching for Profit. And I mean, it's a brief overview of everything, but really it's a business class that you're going to. And when I had gone to it, I didn't actually have a business yet. I mean, I was still riding horses, wanted to start running my own business. And everybody in the regenerative agriculture ranching world, I'm sure, has heard of Ranching for Profit. And it's even for your horse riding business, it would make a big difference. I mean, it really is a business class. And so that kind of opened my eyes. And the biggest thing you had brought up me being glass half full. They had us fill out this thing that's called the SWOT analysis. So if you took a piece of paper and you drew a cross in it, so you had 4 squares, and the first one you'd list your strengths, the second one you'd list your weaknesses, and then third would be the bottom half of the paper, your opportunity and your threats. You would list all those for what your business is, and then you'd see how they could flip-flop. Well, I'm the type of guy that only looks as threats as opportunities, which is probably back to picking up those 2 big round rocks. And so that was kind of the paradigm shift that I had when I went to the school. And they don't tell you to do anything or tell you what to do. They just try to get you to start thinking and evaluate your own situation. So the thing that really stood out to me was the SWOT analysis. And looking back at the last 10 years of my life, I'm thinking, yeah, maybe I wish I would have seen that the other direction.
Yeah. No, that's super helpful. I mean, it seems like a lot more people could benefit from programs like that, and maybe more people do than I'm aware of. I know there's some ranch, I think it's in Colorado, and we've thought about maybe having someone from there on the podcast at some point, but it's called Ranch Lands. But they're a like a regenerative ranching, outfit. But I think over the last couple of years they've developed it into more of a school, and but I know, like, maybe I didn't look very hard, but when I first kind of got interested in living this kind of lifestyle, I ended up just going to a ranch in Montana and just kind of getting thrown in the mix and learning as I went when it came to horses. And then, in fact, it was so frustrating, I didn't really learn anything. And maybe my eyes were just closed and my ears were closed. But and then I ended up finding Brannaman in that whole trail. But it's interesting hearing about that, because we have I'm here in Georgia, and Bill Barnes, you know him,
Yep.
He's been taking on guys, and it's just simple stuff, right? But like, we had a kid here this summer, young man, I should say, and he's from Orlando, never been really on a horse, from just inner city fella, and but he just wants to be a cowboy. There's that bug guys have, and they want to be a cowboy, or gals. And so he came up here, and just in the 3 months he spent here learning simple stuff that we probably would take for granted when it comes to horses, or just like how to run a tractor and simple stuff like that. It was super, super cool to watch that stuff you'd take for granted if you were raised that way. And then from here, you went on to actually go to I think it was a cattle school in Oklahoma or something like that. But are there a lot of like good schools out there, or is there one that you would recommend above others, as far as like someone wanting to go and learn business? But it seems like there's a lot of other stuff. Like, you got to plug in somewhere and learn about pasture management and learn about herd health and all that stuff. I mean, either that or you go to the School of Hard Knocks. But are there schools that you know of that are really good that teach all of that, like as a curriculum, like if you're going to college to be a doctor?
I think Ranching for Profit is probably the best, and they touch a little bit on facility layout and grazing. I mean, that's one whole day of the process, but when you leave there, you're going to have to continue your education. And so there's, other stuff to do once you get outside. But really I would say from a cattle handling perspective, it's a little bit like a horsemanship clinic. If you're looking for it, you're going to find them. If you're not, I mean, there's not very many of them that are going to, pop right out, or something that you should be going to, in my mind. And then grazing is kind of the same way. I mean, there's our extension agent. We have the Washington State University, and they have extension agents that reach out, and they're, worried about soil conservation and plants and grazing. And that's been a good local resource. Sometimes it can get a little bit dry. But I really think the Ranching for Profit is a good place to start, and they'll put you in contact with all of the people like the Wally Olsons and, the Dr. Tom Knopfsinger for stockmanship, and Jim Garish for grazing. And I mean, that's kind of there. It's a pretty small community. So once you get into it, I mean, it branches out from there, and you can take it as far as you want to take it.
Oh yeah, I wrote that down. I've never heard of that place. I'm gonna check that out.
So with that SWOT analysis, I think that's just like different sides of the spectrum, right? And you're talking about how maybe you lean a little too heavy into seeing like, well, we could do this and we could do that. And I don't know the whole deal. We don't have to necessarily get into like specifics with you, but I know for me, especially when you start out working for yourself, or maybe you're trying to get something going for yourself on the side while you're still working doing your main job. You get like ideas and ideas and ideas, and like you said, you can look at things and say, well, that's an opportunity and that's an opportunity. And whether you read something like Rich Dad Poor Dad and it's like you've popped out of the matrix and you start thinking that way, or some people are just kind of born with that knack. Like it's like you got to have that, but then also there's that saying, if you chase two rabbits you'll catch none, and so then you got to kind of like you were talking about, you got to go back to, okay, what is my goal? What is my one rabbit? And I feel like especially young men, like guys in their 20s, they see everything, right? Because it's just everything's out there for the taking, and then you try this and you try that, and like you said, you try to work that out of the hole. But at the same time, the alternative is being so risk adverse that you don't do anything in the first place. And then, like Ben was saying, then you might just be one of the interns sitting on the fence, and you never really get anything done. So, you don't necessarily need to comment on that, but that really resonated with me, because I feel like that's something Ben and I talk about on this podcast a lot. And I know from our personal lives, there have been things that I've tried, and then I'm like, man, that was dumb. Like I just was spinning my wheels like crazy. And that I thought that was going to be, a golden ticket. And then it was just a colossal waste of time and resources. And Ben has stories like that too, I know. So, you're saying that stuff, but I'm thinking it might not be just you. I think everyone, if they've got a little kind of gumption about them, a little get up and go, I think pretty much everyone kind of has to go through that learning curve, and I know I'm still going through it. I wake up each morning, and if I don't sit down and make a checklist of just like what I need to get done that day, and then like I've even got to the point now where I've got like big long-term goals, and I cross-reference my checklist with, well, okay, which one of these like things on my checklist is like, how is that going back to a long-term goal, or is that just something where I'm going to spin my wheels today? And man, it's tough, because it'd be so easy if you just had to, if the only answer was to put your head down and work, there'd be a lot of successful people, because not everyone has it, but there are more people that are willing to just put their head down and work than there are people that are willing to do that and plan everything out to make sure the work is actually worth a damn.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I would have been more likely to be the guy that got on too early and got drug around the round pen, hung up in the stirrup, than I would be the guy to put his horse away. That's for sure.
Well, see, and that's probably not the worst thing in the world, like from a horsemanship perspective, if we want to use that analogy, because that's a good way to do it. I can tell you right now, like, I am 100% we'll just do one more day of groundwork guy. Like if we're talking about kind of our natural disposition, I am the, like, put as many bricks down as possible. When I came out of college, I was the risk adverse guy. I was like the opposite end of the spectrum where it was like, you know, one day you're going to have to get on that freaking horse. Like, you can't just putter around doing this forever. So that was like what I had to grow into. And if it makes you feel any better, that's not any easier to go to like get back to the middle from that side of the spectrum. You know, you might live a little longer, but you also like don't get anything done. So like, it's not like you're the living's worth a damn.
Yeah, I really used to think I was going to die young, and the older I get now, and then look at other people that are the typical cowboy, you know, doing the same thing I'm doing, and we're just the way we're moving around, and they're dragging a leg and, you know, have just a little more beat up than I am. Now I'm starting to think I might live forever.
Yeah.
Well, it really is like life really is like a big game of chess, because you run across people who just kind of leave their pawns sitting right out there for the easy taking. Even if they look like they're winning, they're like, well, I'll win, and I might have like 2 pieces of the chess game left, but you're kind of limping around at that point, and then you don't live as long. And I don't know. I kind of am like Joe said. I feel like I was kind of the opposite. And it's probably why our friendship has gone pretty well, because in the beginning, when I first met Joe, it's like, come on, man, you know, and he's probably thinking, this idiot does never think ahead. And so we both really, it's been fun knowing each other, because it's, it's really good to have friends. And then, you know, finding the older people to be around that can kind of, they look at all your effort, all your dust that you're stirring up behind you, and they just kind of chuckle. And you're like, what are you laughing at? And they're like, I was your age once. And I came out the other side, you know,
So with this new outfit, Kyler, you said you got some folks working for you, and you said this before we got on the podcast, but you mentioned that they're kind of green on the horse side. So it wasn't like you just went out and hired a bunch of top hands necessarily, or got a hold of a bunch of top hands, which I'm not saying that doesn't mean they're not good help if any of these guys end up listening to this. But I think kind of the point behind that is there's it's not necessarily a skill set. It's more certain qualities that'll get you far in terms of whatever endeavor you want to do, whether that's being a cowboy or, you know, working in any kind of enterprise, really. So I'd be curious to know what kind of, you know, how involved were you in that hiring process? And if the folks weren't kind of established stockmanship, horsemanship guys or whatever, what were you looking for?
I mean, to be completely honest, what I was personally looking for was someone that didn't have much experience. Just because talking about the prototypical cowboy that you're going to find that's done this for a long time, knowing my background and what I value with horsemanship and stockmanship, it's going to be really hard to find somebody that's going to have those same values, and they're already going to have been a cowboy for X amount of time. And so we did a little bit of everything, but honestly, we just needed help. I mean, like I was saying, we didn't have anybody. So, you know, April 1st, we're gathering cattle, we're trying to process, we're receiving, and having to get these cattle fed and get ready to go. So anybody that wanted to work, we would take them on. We actually ended up going through 5 guys and ended up with 2. And one of which is the owner's son, and he's great. And I mean, he grew up with work ethic, and he's showing up on time, and he's putting thought process into everything, but he just graduated high school. And so in the end now, I mean, it's really people that are just diligent and putting thought into what they're doing and listening. And, you know, going back to Brian is the one that owns the company now, and he's had a lot of success managing employees with his other business. And one thing I'm not good at is communicating and making things clear to people. I mean, I grew up with a grandfather that would basically just look at you if you didn't do something right, or just let you continue failing till you did get it right. And that's more or less the way that's my type of communication. So really trying to make things clear to communicate with them. And that's the other biggest thing. If they don't know, ask. And it really is neat. And both of the guys that we have now, you know, they may be green with the horse. And the biggest problem with the stockmanship is, I don't want to say it's easy to teach. It's hard for some people to be able to see, but it's real easy to control your own body. And, you know, if you're working cattle, your shoulders and where you're looking is where you're putting pressure, which essentially is where you're going. And when you're on a horse, it's your horse's head. So now you can imagine, if I'm trying to get you to be accurate with your own shoulders, it's fairly easy if you understand when I'm wanting you to twist your shoulders. But now if you've never rode a horse and you're on a horse and someone's asking you to be completely accurate with the horse's head, not just their feet, but where the head placement is, that's really hard for everybody to be great stockmen when they're horseback. So I would almost rather they didn't know anything and we can go back and start from the ground up and teaching horsemanship. And so it's not an awful lot of help. I mean, it would be faster if I did it alone, or it'd be faster if I did certain jobs, but you guys know, I mean, you just need time in the saddle and time to do stuff. So that's kind of the point that we're at now, is just, you know, doing a little bit of horsemanship stuff. We don't have a whole heck of a lot of time yet, but we're almost at that point. But we are sorting a lot of cattle. So now I'm able to, I'm sure they're sick of listening to me talk, but I'll sit at the end of the alley to clean stuff up behind them and talk about head placement and when I would ask and when I would turn my horse and when I would do stuff. So I would almost rather have somebody that knows nothing, because the two guys we have now are receptive to listening to me. You know, they don't have an ego about anything that they're doing. And one of them has a cattle background, just not a huge background riding horses. And he's good. I mean, I can see it in their mind. They're reading it perfectly, but when they're horseback, they have a hard time getting there. And on foot, it's such a big difference, which then makes the horsemanship more important. And they see the importance of having good horsemanship because of that.
Yeah. Well, you know, a big part of that too, you were talking about them having to do a lot horseback now, but you're not, you know, maybe this fall you'll get more into the horsemanship. Them having that experience, that will make that horsemanship that they learn have a lot more meaning to it, which it can only be a good thing, you know, as opposed to if you've never really done anything with cattle and you're like, all right, for the first 3 months, I'm just going to like show you how to ride. Like, yeah, you probably learn a lot and that would be really nice to have, but there would still be a learning curve because they wouldn't understand their job yet. So now that horsemanship, it's almost like there's an added incentive for them and an added motivation, because they're like, oh, okay, I know next summer I got to go out with Kyler and do X, Y, and Z. And what he's telling me right now with, you know, the flexion here, the leg here, or whatever, this is how I'm going to be able to do that job better.
Yeah. Applied horsemanship. Absolutely.
And you know, that actually, the other thing about that too is I don't have a ton of experience managing people, but I feel like I have enough to know that you got to be able to you got to be willing to put in the deposit of spending time with them early to get the dividends of how valuable they can be to you later. Right. So before I rode horses for the public, I worked in software, and I remember when I first started, I'd work on teams and I'd be like, oh, what can I do to help and blah, blah, blah. And they'd be like, oh, well, you could do this, but it's going to take me less time to do it than for me to teach you to do it. Right. And I was like, okay, well, that doesn't seem very smart, but you're the boss. And then when I finally got to the point where I had people under me, I made a point to always, like, even if it was going to take twice as long, I was like, okay, we need to do this, and I'm going to talk you through doing this, and I'm going to teach you to do this. And then from that on, you lay that foundation, and then 3 months later, you're way more productive than if you just have kind of like Tweedledee and Tweedledum over there doing medial tasks, and you're doing all the stuff that actually takes a skill set, and that can be applied to anything. So I think that's really smart, and I know it can be really frustrating, but a huge pet peeve of mine is when someone is working with someone else and they're like, well, I could either show you to do this or we could save time by just me doing it. And if you have the time to go slow and teach the person, it's always worth educating them, in my opinion. And it always drove me nuts when people didn't do that. So I'm like, rah rah for you. I'm glad you're doing that.
Hey, everybody. I hope you're enjoying the podcast. If you are, pause for a moment and head on over to Spotify or Apple. There you can leave us a review and you can follow the podcast. These actions help us by pushing the podcast out to new audiences who have not found us yet. And that in turn allows us to keep on doing what we do best, bringing you guys new, fresh, exciting content and interviews week by week. Thank you, guys.
Well, and I hate to keep going back and talking about him, but the owner of the company now that runs his dirt work company, I mean, he's trying to make me be a manager because I'm not. I am the guy that just get out of the way and let me do it. That's my normal mindset. And he's telling me it seems opposite, but when you're running a job, and he does huge dirt work jobs, he's saying when you're running a job, you need to have your guys doing the most important thing, which you would think would be opposite. And so a lot of training has to come with that, obviously. But he's saying that way, if you get pulled off to do something else, it's getting done. You need your guys doing the most important stuff first, and you're doing the most meaningless stuff. And then that way, if you get pulled off or something else comes up, the most important stuff is happening because there's only one guy that is running everything. So that's, it goes back to your point a little bit of talking about, your experience working on a team. So it's, again, I can't take credit for taking all the time for it. I mean, it is the way that this thing is being put together, and, I'm being told to do that.
Yeah. Well, it's good advice. He knows what he's talking about.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's Jocko talks about that, the multiple points of command, so that way you're not it's like they would have in the war, right? If they bomb the general's tent, depending on the army, that's why some armies lose and some win, because like if they bombed Genghis Khan's tent, they probably would have still kept on winning because he had that kind of that leadership spread out to all of his generals, where other people, if they bombed Hitler's bunker, they might have just ended World War II earlier. But how are you dealing with that though? Like for a guy that because you were saying earlier, you're even the kind of guy that likes to let people just kind of figure it out. Not even necessarily, and I don't know, like I don't want to speak for you, but maybe you don't actually not want to take the time, but you just like to see how people are going to handle it because you're like, hey, I had to figure this out. Let's see how you can figure it out. Is that kind of your attitude, or was it more like you valued your time to the point where you're like, hey, I just don't have time to help you guys? Because I could see that too. I've been around people and they kind of, you came up hard and you're like, hey, I want you to have to struggle for this. I can't just give you this information for free.
It's not so much an information thing for me. I mean, if somebody's willing to listen, I'll give it to them. But them learning how to struggle, I can just tell when I do talk too much. At a certain point, people need to just go make mistakes and try to figure it out. And then maybe when they come back, it'll make a little more sense when I'm saying something. But one of my favorite things to do, which is a personality flaw for me, is to let somebody struggle at something and then go do it effortlessly. And it doesn't matter what it is. So, we use a bud box for cattle, and there's a lot of things that can be hard for people, but for some reason, this is just where you can see it and it's obvious. And it is, I'm almost a jerk about it. And I hope no one else listens to this podcast, but that's helped me. But I'll almost let them struggle at it. And then you go in and it's like 2 steps forward, 2 steps back in the cattle load. And they're just looking at you like, oh my God, what are you doing? And it's been bad enough, especially with all these put together cattle. It's been bad enough that there's times where there might be a cow that, is chasing someone around trying to kill them in the bud box, and I'll walk in there. They're up on the fence. I'll walk in there and load them up the alleyway. And it's that much of a difference. So that I do have a part of me that takes some enjoyment with that, but they're, getting back to whether I let people struggle or not. This summer was just it just gets to where there's a time crunch. So if I can't let them struggle, I shouldn't say let them struggle, but if I can't give them the time to work at it, it's almost like I'll do it. But there's also been, one of these pasture leases we got turned out to be just a huge bear, and there's no fences on it. And none. So we took, 300 head of these cows we put together from all over that we had barely had, pushed them onto a 22,000 acre lease, and there's not one fence that's keeping them from coming back to private property. And part of my management plan was to drive the cattle in there so that they would want to come back out, because we had to have them out at a certain date. And that plan worked a little too well. And so, we get these cattle in and all of a sudden they're hiking out to the private ground, and we've got to get them and put them back up on the lease. And, we've got manpower now and all these guys doing stuff, and they're all learning to ride. And it got to the point where I would just let them go fence and irrigate and have one of them come drive me around and pick me up. So essentially they drop my horse and my dogs and I off. And then certain parts of it, there's a lot of traffic. So I would have them drive up the road with the hazards on. But otherwise, they're more or less, they were just a caddy for me, and I had everybody else doing production stuff. So there's a little bit of it got to a point where, okay, this isn't the place to train somebody or the time. You guys go get something else done, and I'll handle this on my own.
Yeah.
But trust me, I would have loved to have had somebody proficient enough to handle that on their own. I got tired of riding up and down the concrete or the asphalt.
Yeah, absolutely. This is fascinating conversation, because while you're talking, it's making me think. I've kind of been in this situation a few times, but I'm even thinking about somebody like the guy that does the dirt jobs. What if you say you own the company or you're running the crew, and then you put yourself on the most important part of the grade, and you're driving the biggest piece of equipment. Maybe you're leasing the thing, so you have it on a timer, and it's expensive. And so now you're concentrating on this task that is very important and expensive, but it's pretty simple, and you have to be so tuned in, and you're running the job. So now if anything else goes wrong, either you have to quit that and things are expensive and time runs out, or you keep working and no one can get a hold of you because you're just like zeroed in doing this thing that you think is so important that you have to do it, when really all you did is you pretty much left for the day. Like, yeah, you're getting something done, but like the leader just left because now he's plugged into this important job and nobody has access to him. I never thought of it that way. And that's probably just one way to look at it, but there's a real lesson there. I'd never thought of it in that sense, that you kind of unplug yourself from the project, even though you're the guy who is supposed to be leading. You're not a good leader if you're doing that. So that's really cool. So yourself, as far as to get back to, like, we were talking about the clinics and education, when it comes to stockmanship, in the same way we do with horsemanship. Do you find time or still make time to go to stockmanship clinics and stuff like that with your busy schedule?
I would, and it's a little bit, for me, it's a little bit like the horsemanship world, where I don't necessarily want to just go to anybody's. I kind of have a path and somebody that I'm, that I really like what he does, and which is Dr. Tom. And it's more I haven't done a lot of stockmanship with Dr. Tom. I've listened to him, went and spent a little bit of time at his place, talked to him on the phone, and he's got some guys that he's telling me you really need to go spend some time with him. And we haven't quite gotten connected, but I'm hoping to be able to get him to come this direction and spend a little bit of time. And then he almost came out this Labor Day and was going to do a training for just our ranch crew. And, we have so many different types of cattle. We've got the fall cows that are calving. We've got these bred cows that are rebred. We've got the heifers. So it would have been neat to have all the different classes of cattle we could have worked with. And it just didn't pan out. I kind of quit following up with him because, one, I didn't know who or what we were going to have for a crew or what our schedule was going to look like. So I don't have a lot of extra time. I would definitely make time for it. I'm just particular about who I would go do it with now.
Yeah. So here's an interesting question. Now, comparing horsemanship to stockmanship, I know principles are similar, but in actual, application terms, like if you asked me, who I was wanting to go ride with, and I could supply that. And if you said, hey, what are your goals and what are you hoping to do with horses and where are the areas you feel you need to get better? And, one of my answers would be all of it, but I would have some specific areas I wanted to get better and things I was trying to learn and reasons for why I rode with the people I did. So for a stockman like yourself, do you have goals for what you would like to see with your herd, and not like nutrition wise or grazing rotation plans, stuff like that, but actual like traits and behavioral things you would like to see changed in your herd? And could you give me an example of one of those things?
The biggest thing that I've started to look for now is getting my cattle to draw to me, to look to me. So to put it in and I had this conversation with Joe. If you were thinking of working one horse in a round pen, your point of drive, the way that you step back to get them to draw to you, walk to the hip, if you were looking for hindquarters, which would turn their head and actually get a direction change, or being able to push on an eye. Drawing cattle is probably the biggest thing that I would want the whole herd to do now. And it just absolutely changes everything. So if you were to ride into a pasture and everything was to pick their head up and look at you rather than try to get away from you, that's probably the biggest trait that I'm chasing right now. And here lies the problem with help. So now you've got people that aren't looking for that. Imagine trying to hook a colt on in a round pen with two people walking around the round pen that are not paying attention to anything. That is the same exact equation. And I don't know how many people, and good hands will be riding with me. But if I'm sorting, I'll start looking at how cows are reacting to me from across the field. And if anybody comes with me, and I'm going to say almost anyone, they're riding along talking and they're not even thinking about that yet. And this comes into your horse's head placement now, where I'm already starting to sort and I'm already starting to move cattle and position stuff depending on what we're doing. And nobody else is even looking at it until you've got them all bunched up in the corner. And now you're right there and you're going to start sorting, or the way they're reacting to you. So if I were to ride into a pasture, and again, let's call this a round pen. You go into a round pen, I'm always going to work the middle and I'm going to work the front. If it's one cow, the front is its head. So it's not where I want it to go. The front is the head. And just like a horse. And so I'm going to go into the pasture. I'm going to get in the middle. I'm going to figure out where the front is. If it's a herd, it's going to be where the majority of the heads are placed. Or if you can't tell where the heads are going, that generally is a good thing, because it means they're calm enough that you can get in and you can set your direction. And so then I know where the front is. I was kind of losing my point a little bit about where I was going with the middle and the front. But what was I talking about?
Well, I was asking you about, what were some actual applications of like goals you would have for your cattle, or like if you were going to a stockmanship clinic, if you just kind of go with your ears open, or you're like, man, I'm really trying to work on this with the herd, so I'm going to go to this clinic to try to learn more about a particular thing that you're trying to implement with your cattle.
I think where I was going with the round pen analogy and talking about going into the middle of the pasture and diagnosing the front when the majority of people are working cattle, it would be the equivalent of the horse standing in the middle of the round pen and they're running around the outside. And so think about every time you go into a pasture and you ride to the back, and you'll be looking at a cow's ass, which is going to follow the head. So if you're looking at a tail head, you're generally going to be sitting on the fence and the cows will be going across the middle of the pasture. So if you put yourself back into the middle, now all of a sudden you're showing the cow where to go instead of just blocking it. And it really is. I mean, it is so obvious now to me, and it was not always like this, but really the way a lot of people work cattle is the cattle are in the middle and they're running around the outside of it. And when I say this, I mean great horsemen that are doing this and they can't see it. So for me personally, the trait that I want in my cows is for them to look to me and ask, where do you want me to go? And that could be, I want to be able to drive them. I want to be able to draw them. It's no different than a horse. If you only have a horse that hooks on, I mean, you guys know how dangerous that is. You have to be able to drive them away. You have to be able to bring them to you. As far as what I would go get help with is separating one animal and being able to send it away. That's one thing that I want to get better at. And that is something that I work on doing. But for me, it still seems like it gets a little fast, and which I have no problem going fast. I mean, I love running stuff down to rope it. I don't mind going fast to stop with one and turn. And I like all that stuff, but I notice I have a harder time keeping that slow. But the one thing I will say when it comes to trailer loading or even going to the corrals, pressure is not always bad. I mean, if you're thinking of it like petting one to a stop, it really isn't bad to have a cow really try you at the herd if you're trying to separate it. And you really end up putting a lot of pressure on it. And when it leaves, you leave it alone. I mean, you'll be able to walk them right over to a trailer and they'll step in, opposed to going out and doing everything perfectly. And you get to the trailer and now a cow leaves because you don't have, unless you rope it, you don't have direct feel with the horse. I mean, it's all, or a cow, sorry. You know, if they leave, you're going to have to go run it down again. You can't stop it, with the exception of roping it. So I've had some really good success this year loading cows that were down on the road by letting them go away from the trailer, using my dogs as pressure, bringing them back. And I mean, petting them in the trailer off a little 3-strand fence that's about 30 feet long. And the worst luck that I've had is little baby pairs. So these cows that are calving out in the pasture, and the calf is a really good draw to the cow. And so it's easy to get that pair moving together. And I always want to move everything paired up. Well, essentially then I'm getting to the trailer and I put no pressure on them away from the trailer. And then those cows really don't want to step in. I mean, they're not necessarily wild. Nothing bad's happening. You know, so you throw the calf in the trailer and you think the cow's going to jump in and end up having to put a lot of pressure on it away from the trailer. So I played around with, even though it's a pair, sending them the wrong way and putting some pressure on them and going back. And I mean, I'm not going to say it's 100%, but that it really, the horsemanship translates so well if you put the thought into it. Back to your question about what I would work on, that would be what I'd work on. How do I get one separated nicely and be able to go do something like put them in a trailer? What can I do better to make that stuff look smooth where it's effortless and I don't have to put a lot of pressure on them?
Well, that definitely explains why you would want people that had a little less experience and were more apt to learn. Because that's like what you just described. That sounds wonderful, but that doesn't sound like the traditional American cowboy narrative. Heck, there was that show, Trace Adkins hosted it there. I don't know if they're doing it anymore. The Cowboy, what was that thing called, Joe? The Extreme Cowboy Showdown or something?
Cowboy, yeah, something like that.
But they should have called it like cattle molesting on TV. You know, like everything they did just was a cluster. You know, it'd be like, and even the competition was set up. This is so backwards about and hopefully it's changing, but like the cowboy culture, perceived cowboy culture in America, like their challenge would be like, all right, I want you and you and you to go and get those 5 cows away from that herd and put them in that trailer. And I want you to do it in 3 minutes. And you're going to have to take them past a bull and the cows are hot or something, like something stupid like that, you know? And then they get out there and they're rah, rah, rah. 3 guys make it. The third guy probably gets bucked off. One of them gets their saddle busted and the cow gets hurt and the trailer almost tips over and they get it and they're like, yeehaw, cowboy up. And then you have some young intern come to the ranch, first time trying to learn stockmanship, and they're like, the first day here, you're doing things calm, and they're like, whoa. You're like, whoa, what's up? And they're like, oh, wow, that went a lot better today than I thought. And you're like, well, what did you think? Well, I was watching that show on the Inspiration Channel, and I thought we were going to do it like that. And they're so relieved we're not, But, some old salty guys would be kind of disappointed you didn't do it that way. And so that makes sense. You want people with a little less experience. But, do you brand your cows or your calves or rope them and tag them?
I do, yeah. And so that's one of the conversations when you're talking about drawing the line of, where do you maybe sacrifice a calf a little bit? And I don't think we're sacrificing them, but so Dr. Tom is the guy that I talked to, and he's really big on training them through a calf table and using that because it's lower stress. And for me, I mean, the great part about animals is they will forgive us. So I'll just do the best job that I can heading and healing them, but I'm roping them to brand them. That's not really negotiable. I'll probably get out of cattle if we quit doing that.
Yeah. And when you're doing that, are you inviting people that, aren't working with you every day? And do you try to, I don't know, what you'd say, steer the energy in a certain direction, or do you just let guys do it the way they would do it at home? And then, it is what it is.
That's a struggle and done a little bit of everything. So I've, there's a group of guys here that grew up. So some of the guys that I worked with when we were, that first ranch job, they went from healing calves to getting a little bit more into the heading and healing. And so that was the thing around here. Ranch roping was something that we were kind of putting on for a little bit, that I was kind of instigating the whole thing. And then there's some guys that they were already handy, but got really handy, and some kind of brought a group of guys together. And now it's, our kids are old enough to be roping. And so now it's a little bit hard for me because you're going to sacrifice the cattle a little bit for a kid to be roping. So it's slowed it down a little bit, and there's, smaller crews and trying to get the kids in place to heal them. But I've gone from having a whole bunch of people, and it's a little bit wild, and the cattle aren't necessarily taken care of, and those are fine. Just we'll do that at other people's brandings with other people's cattle now. So I'm fairly selective about the people that come to mind, and it's not always the way that I want it. And again, I mean, nothing dies. The cattle forgive us. Everybody can get better, but I try to, like, for instance, in a perfect world, if we don't get real busy, I'll ban the calves at birth because it's virtually no stress on them. And then when you get into trying to make your vaccine effective when you are branding them, you're not pulling organs out of them. So it's one less thing that you're doing. So trying to minimize the amount that the load that we're putting on the cow's immune system, because we are stressing them out when we rope them. But there's nothing that I love better than roping a calf off of a cow when it's quiet and having it come out and the cow's coming with it. And I mean, one of the big things that I cannot stand is when someone chases a mom away from its baby. And even when I'm tagging them. So it's just neat when you can take the time to get everything paired up. And I've had my own personal cows that I've raised from replacement heifers to all these trader cattle. But there's nothing more rewarding to me than being able to spend time with the moms and the babies and have all of them stay together and trust you around their baby. And so I hold that in pretty high regard. So I try not to let just anybody show up anymore. But again, it doesn't always go the way that I'm anticipating it's going to go.
Sounds about right.
Could you talk about your tagging process a little bit?
So initially the most important thing is to give the cow time with her calf. And so if you think there is going to be a problem, I mean, for heaven's sakes, don't tag the calf. So you might go, first thing you do is you're going to send the cow to the calf. And if they're paired up, great. And you're going up and you can tell she's a little bit tentative about it. I might take a day where I get close enough that she's about halfway bothered and I make sure she's with her calf. And then I just turn and leave, and I'll write down the tag number. And again, mind you, if I get real busy, I won't tag a calf because to me, it's not the most important thing. I want the cows to go find their calf. I do think it makes life a lot easier if they're tagged. But if we've got a lot of other stuff going on, cows on the road, projects, that irrigation stuff that needs to be done, we'll tag them later. But in a typical world, if I've got time, I'm in my cows every day. I'm going to go right out there. I'm going to get all of them up so they suck. If there's a pair that's not together, I'm going to send that cow to the calf, regardless of whether they're tagged or not. So if there's a newborn baby, the cow's with it. I'm just going to leave them alone for sure for the first day. And then you'll tell if they're bothered when you're riding up there. So if she is bothered, I'll send them, put them together, and then I'm just going to get out of there. And I'll do that. And you'll see the cow start to let down when she realizes that you're just going to put them together. So then I'll neck the calf, and I'll stay a ways off. And again, just because of the way that I am, I don't necessarily just dally on one. It's a baby calf. So pretty much I'll just break their hindquarters if they leave. Just keep breaking their hindquarters. And at that time, you're getting closer. If the cow's bothered, just slow down. Give her time to get to the calf. If she's bawling, I'm not going to run up there and flank it. And so then I'll get close enough that I'll generally take a half a wrap, or depends on the size of the calf, go down, flank it, put it on my heel rope. And then I want my horse close enough that I can grab all my stuff. So now I've got the calf with its feet in the air, and I'll generally tie off and take a tuck, get all my stuff, take my time, castrate it, put an ear tag in it. And I've done all kinds of stuff, but pretty much now that's all I'll do. So then I'll take the tuck loose, but rather than just popping the feet loose and letting the calf up, I'll take my rope off slightly because I don't want them to push on me, the calf. And then I'll actually go as far as standing it up and holding the front of it so I don't just let it run off. So I'll wait for it to come off with pressure, holding it with the mom there. The mom's always there. That's the first requirement. I won't tag a calf without the mom being there. And my rope's already off. And then once it stands up and comes off pressure, I'll pet it down the back and let it go with its mom. And generally it just stays right there and I walk off, pulling my rope up. But everything to me, and this is coming back to the horsemanship world. If we're at someplace roping or at a branding, you have one stretched out and they don't always get up and everybody pulls the feet and throws them back at it. I would never do that just because of the same fact. Imagine roping your horse by a hind foot and all of a sudden you get your horse really good with that hind foot. And you're just going to pull the foot out and throw it on the ground. To me, it's that same thing where I do not want them to push on me. So I'll pull the ropes off the feet, grab the tail and just roll it up onto its feet. And when it gets up, I'll pet it down the back and let it walk off. I cannot stand stuff pushing on me. So I don't train them to push on me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it makes sense. I remember Joel posting video a while back, I think, where I don't know what was going on, but whatever it was, a calf was getting up after it was roped, and you were there, and you kind of like pet it and then kind of send it on its way. And I thought that was pretty cool. That was,
so when a cow is going to send a calf forward, yeah, when a cow is going to pet a calf, or when a cow is going to send a calf forward, its calf, it's going to lick it with the hair. So it's licking from the front to the back. So the same, if you get one that stops in an alleyway, I always walk from the head to the tail to send it forward. And if not, you can take your hand and start at the shoulders and wipe it toward the tail head. And I'm going to say 70% of the time that'll send them forward. So it's kind of that same thing. So even in the beginning, when it's a day old calf, I start that same thing. I halter broke a steer for my daughter, and it was a calf that I had tagged. Never really handled it again except for branding. The thing was doing lead buys in like 20 minutes. That's how much of a difference it makes.
Was she taking that to the state fair or something?
Yeah, she did. She took it this year. So her first year showing, so it wasn't super great, but the steer was gentle.
Well, that's safety first, right?
Yep.
Yeah. Now she can think about the quality next year.
Yep.
Yeah.
Good deal. Cool. Well, Ben, I don't know if you have any more for Kyler, but man, this has been really fun conversation, man. I'm glad you finally are kind of winding down from your busy schedule, so we got time to talk with you.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks for prodding me. I might have kept putting you off.
Oh,
Yeah, it's been pretty eye opening. Good
yeah.
talk. I don't really have anything else to say, Joe. Besides, I think Kyler came on here saying that he doesn't talk a lot, and he he kind of proved otherwise. He hung with us for an hour and 40 without much problem. So kudos to you. And great to. I think I met you once briefly in Ellensburg. Barely remember it, but I think Joel introduced us. But if we didn't quite meet, it's good to see you again, and really fun talking with you.
Yeah. Thanks for having me on. You guys are going to have to get out here one of these days again.
Absolutely, man. I've still never been to Washington State. I think it might be the last state in the West I haven't been to. So I gotta knock that off the list. But anyway, yeah, man. We'll talk to you next time.